History does not erase the guilty. It erases their victims. For 40 years, a house in rural Vermont stood as monument to a crime no one would name. 3 generations lived within its walls. 3 generations died in their sleep. The question is not whether the dead can speak. The question is, are we willing to listen? It is autumn 2024. The town of Millbrook, Vermont, population 2,100, sits nestled in a valley where the green mountains meet the sky like the spine of something ancient and unmovable. The air smells of wet leaves and wood smoke. Mornings arrive cold and sharp. By afternoon, the sunlight slants gold through the maples, turning the world amber. This is a place that prides itself on continuity. The same families have lived here for generations. The same church bells ring at the same hour. The same diner serves the same coffee in the same ceramic mugs, chipped but never replaced. But there is a house on Ridgeway Lane that no one will buy. It has been on the market for 11 years. The listing is modest, a 3-bedroom colonial built in 1912, white clapboard siding, black shutters, a wraparound porch with peeling paint. The asking price has dropped 4 times. The photographs are recent, clean, bright, ordinary. But families who tour it never return. Children refuse to enter. Dogs pull at their leashes and whine. The real estate agent, a woman named Claire Dennison, has learned to stop asking why. She has learned to describe it with a single word, spoken quietly, as if naming it too loudly might give it form. Heavy. The house feels heavy, she says. Not haunted, not cursed, not any of the words people use when they want to reduce silence into spectacle, just heavy, as if something in the walls has been waiting. The house was built by a man named Samuel Carver in 1912, but it is his grandson, Dr. Thomas Carver, whose name still hangs over the town like fog that refuses to lift. If you ask the older residents of Millbrook about Thomas Carver, they will pause before they answer. Some will say he was a good man. Some will say he was a complicated man. None will say what they mean. Thomas Carver was born in 1938, the only son of a modest farming family. He was bright, scholarship bright, and left Millbrook at 18 to study medicine at Dartmouth. He returned in 1966 with a degree, a wife, and a son. He opened a family practice on Main Street, a small brick building with green awnings and a bell that chimed when the door opened. For nearly 20 years, Dr. Thomas Carver was the most trusted man in Millbrook. He delivered babies, he sat at bedsides, he made house calls in the middle of winter, his black bag in hand, his breath visible in the cold. He was a church elder, a school board member, a man who shook hands at the 4th of July parade and donated quietly to the volunteer fire department. He was the kind of man people called decent. But decency is a mask, and masks, given enough time, begin to rot from the inside. It started with whispers. 1981. A woman named Ruth Hallen, 28 years old, a secretary at the elementary school, went to the police station on a Tuesday morning in March. She was shaking. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She told the officer at the desk that Dr. Thomas Carver had assaulted her. She said it had happened during a routine appointment the week before. She said that he had sedated her. She said she woke with her clothes rearranged and a fog in her mind she could not explain. The officer took notes. He told her he would look into it. He never filed the report. By the end of the week, Ruth Hallen had been placed on administrative leave from her job. The reason given was emotional instability. By the end of the month, she had been admitted voluntarily, the paperwork said, to a psychiatric facility in Burlington. She would remain there for 10 years. She died in 1991 at the age of 38 of what the death certificate called complications from chronic mental illness. Her daughter, Anna, was 14 years old. Her body, though, her body knew long before that. Ruth Hallen was not the first. There were others, women who came forward, women who were told they misunderstood, women who were told they were confused, women who were told quietly and with great care that Dr. Carver was a pillar of the community and that accusations like these, unfounded, hysterical, vengeful, could ruin not just one man but an entire town. And so the women stopped coming forward, not because they stopped remembering, but because they learned that memory without witness is a kind of madness. The town made a choice, not a loud choice, not a formal vote, but a choice nonetheless. They chose order over truth. They chose reputation over reckoning. They chose to forget what could not be forgotten. And in doing so, they became accomplices, not to the crime, to the silence. The Carver House, the white colonial on Ridgeway Lane, was never the site of the assaults. Those took place in the clinic, in the exam rooms with their paper-covered tables and fluorescent lights and the faint smell of antiseptic. But the house remembered anyway, because Thomas Carver came home every night. He sat at the dinner table. He kissed his wife. He helped his son with homework. He slept in a bed with clean sheets, and the house absorbed it. The way wood absorbs water, the way stone absorbs cold. His wife, Margaret, began to notice things in the late 1980s. Thomas stopped sleeping through the night. He would wake at 3 a.m. and sit in the kitchen with the lights off, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours before. He stopped looking at mirrors. He washed his hands compulsively, scrubbing until the skin cracked and bled. Margaret asked him once if something was wrong. He told her he was tired. She believed him. Or perhaps she chose to believe him. There is a difference. In 2003, 19 years after Ruth Hallen was institutionalized, a staff member at the Burlington Psychiatric Facility was cleaning out a storage room. The facility was being renovated. Old files were being digitized or discarded. She found a box labeled Hallen, Ruth, 1981, to 1991. Inside were the standard documents, intake forms, medication logs, therapy notes. But at the bottom of the box, folded carefully and sealed in a plastic bag, was a handwritten letter. 14 pages, written in blue ink on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was uneven, rushed in some places, painfully deliberate in others. It was addressed to no one. It began, "My name is Ruth Hallen. I am 28 years old. I am not crazy. I need someone to know what happened before I forget how to say it." The staff member read the first page, then the second. By the fourth page, she was crying. She made a copy. She sealed the original back in the box and marked it for archival retention. She took the copy home. She did not know what to do with it. For 6 months it sat in a drawer in her kitchen. And then, one evening, she mailed it anonymously to the Millbrook town clerk's office. No return address, no note, just the letter. It arrived on a Monday morning in November 2003. The clerk, a woman named Judith Greaves, 62 years old, a lifelong resident of Millbrook, opened it at her desk. She read the first sentence. She closed the envelope. She locked it in a filing cabinet. She told no one. The letter would remain locked in that cabinet for 16 more years. But something had shifted. The silence, which had held for decades, had developed a crack. Small, barely visible, but a crack nonetheless. And through that crack, the past began to seep, not in a flood, but in a slow, relentless drip, the way water finds its way through stone, the way truth finds its way through lies, the way the body remembers what the law forgets. Every moral collapse begins with a single choice, not the choice to commit evil, but the choice to believe you will not be caught. For Dr. Thomas Carver, that choice came in 1973. He was 35 years old. His practice was thriving. His reputation was unassailable. He had a wife who loved him, a son who admired him, and a town that trusted him with their bodies, their fears, their secrets. But something inside him had begun to hunger, not for more success, not for more respect, for control, absolute control, the kind of control that can only exist in the space between consciousness and oblivion. It started small. A woman came in for a routine exam. She was nervous. She always was. Thomas offered her a sedative, just something mild, he said, to help her relax. She agreed. He administered the injection, and then he waited. He watched her eyes soften, watched her breathing slow, watched the tension leave her body until she was limp, compliant, defenseless. He could have stopped there. He did not. Afterward, she woke with no memory of what had happened. She thanked him. She paid at the front desk. She left. And Thomas Carver understood something that would shape the next 11 years of his life. Sedation erases witness, and without witness there is no crime. Only his word, and the word of a trusted doctor in a small town, is gospel. The second time was easier. The third time was easier still. By 1975, it had become routine. Not frequent. Thomas was careful. He understood that patterns draw attention. He spaced the assaults months apart. He varied the sedatives. He kept no records beyond the standard notes. Patient sedated for procedure. No complications. Follow-up scheduled. He chose his victims carefully.
Women without husbands, women new to town, women who had already been labeled difficult, emotional, unstable, women the town would not believe. And when one of them, Ruth Hallen, in 1981, found the courage to speak, the machinery of power moved swiftly and without hesitation. The police chief at the time was a man named Donald Pierce. He had known Thomas Carver since childhood. They fished together, attended the same church. Their sons played on the same Little League team. When Ruth Hallen filed her report, Donald Pierce called Thomas that same evening. "Tom," he said, "we need to talk." They met at the diner, sat in a back booth, spoke quietly. Thomas did not deny it outright. He said Ruth was confused. He said she had a history of anxiety. He said the sedative must have caused a dissociative episode, rare but documented. He said he would be happy to provide her medical records to support this. Donald Pierce nodded. He believed him, or he chose to believe him. The report was never filed. But the records show something even more disturbing. Ruth Hallen was not confused. She was precise. In the letter she would later write, the letter that would sit sealed in a filing cabinet for 22 years, she described the exam room in forensic detail. The crack in the ceiling tile above the exam table, the smell of latex gloves, the sound of Thomas Carver's breath, steady and controlled as he moved her body like an object. The way her limbs would not obey her, the way her voice would not form words, the way she knew, even in the fog, that something terrible was happening, and the way she woke, minutes or hours later, with her clothes rearranged, and Thomas Carver standing at the sink, washing his hands, his back to her, humming softly. She was not confused, she was drugged, and she remembered. For years, Thomas Carver continued. Outwardly, nothing changed. He delivered babies. He treated pneumonia and broken bones and high blood pressure. He coached his son's soccer team. He read scripture at Sunday service. But inwardly, something had begun to shift. It started with sleep. In 1985, Thomas began waking in the middle of the night. Not from nightmares. He did not dream. He simply woke, his heart pounding, his skin slick with sweat, his mind blank. He would sit at the edge of the bed, his hands shaking, and try to remember why he was afraid. He could not. Margaret, his wife, would stir beside him. "Tom, are you all right?" "I'm fine, just restless," he would say. She would go back to sleep. He would not. By 1987, he had stopped looking at mirrors, not consciously, not deliberately, but he found himself avoiding them. In the bathroom, he would shave with his eyes half closed, focusing on the blade, not his reflection. In the hallway, he would glance away as he passed. When Margaret asked him once why he never looked at himself anymore, he told her he didn't know what she meant. But he did. He knew exactly what she meant, because when he did look, when he forced himself to meet his own eyes, he saw something he could not name. Not guilt. Guilt would have been manageable. This was something else, a hollowing, as if the man in the mirror was not him, as if the man in the mirror was something wearing his face. By 1990, he had developed a compulsion, hand-washing. He would scrub his hands 20, 30, 40 times a day, at the clinic, at home, in the middle of the night. He would stand at the sink, the scalding water, and scrub until his skin cracked and bled. Margaret asked him once if he had developed OCD. He told her he was just being thorough. But the truth he would never speak aloud, was that his hands felt dirty. Not visibly, not in a way soap could reach. They felt dirty in a way that went deeper than skin, as if the act of washing was not to remove something, but to prove to himself that his hands still belonged to him. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 1992, Thomas Carver began seeing a psychiatrist in Burlington. He drove 40 miles each way to ensure no one in Millbrook would know. He told the psychiatrist he was experiencing intrusive thoughts. He did not specify what kind. The psychiatrist prescribed an SSRI. Thomas took it for 3 months, then stopped. Not because it wasn't working, but because it was. The intrusive thoughts quieted, the compulsions eased, and in the silence that followed, Thomas Carver realized something that terrified him more than any symptom. He did not want to be cured, because if the guilt left, so would the last proof that he was still human. Thomas Carver did not act alone. He could not have. The crime required witnesses who would not see, authorities who would not act, a community that would not remember. And Millbrook gave him all three. When Ruth Hallen was institutionalized in 1981, the church held a prayer service, not for Ruth, for her daughter, Anna. The pastor, Reverend Paul Mitchum, spoke of the tragedy of mental illness. He spoke of the importance of faith in times of confusion. He spoke of the need to support the Hallen family. He did not speak of Ruth's accusation. He did not speak of Thomas Carver. When a woman in the congregation, a teacher named Linda Frost, asked quietly after the service if anyone had looked into Ruth's claims, Reverend Paul Mitchum took her aside. He told her that false accusations were a kind of sin. He told her that spreading rumors was a kind of violence. He told her that the best way to honor Ruth was to pray for her healing, not to indulge her delusions. Linda Frost never asked again. The town operated on an unspoken agreement. What you know, you do not say. What you say, you do not repeat. What you repeat, you do not believe. It was not malice. It was something quieter, something more insidious. It was the collective decision that order mattered more than truth, that reputation mattered more than justice, that the comfort of forgetting mattered more than the agony of witness. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 1984, 3 years after Ruth Hallen was institutionalized, another woman came forward. Her name was Ellen Mayhew. She was 34 years old, a librarian, married, 2 children. She went to the police. She told them the same story, the same exam room, the same sedative, the same erasure.
This time, the police chief, still Donald Pierce, did not call Thomas Carver. He called Ellen's husband. He told him, gently, that his wife was unwell. He suggested she see a therapist. He suggested the family take some time away. Ellen's husband believed him. Within a month, Ellen had resigned from the library. Within 6 months, the family had moved to New Hampshire. Ellen never spoke of it again. Not to her husband, not to her children, not to anyone. But her body remembered. She developed chronic migraines, insomnia, a visceral, irrational terror of medical settings. She would die in 2006 at the age of 56 of a stroke. Her daughter would later say that her mother had refused to see a doctor for 15 years, even when the headaches became unbearable, even when her speech began to slur. She refused, because something in her, something deeper than memory, knew that examination tables were not safe. In 2003, The same year Ruth Hallen's letter was mailed to the town clerk, something else surfaced. A woman named Dr. Helen Cross, a forensic psychologist researching institutional abuse in the 1980s, requested archived medical records from the Burlington Psychiatric Facility. She was looking for patterns, cases where women had been committed after making accusations of sexual assault. She found 14 women across Vermont, institutionalized between 1978 and 1990. All of them had accused doctors. All of them had been diagnosed with delusional disorder. All of them had died before the age of 60. 3 of them had been patients of Dr. Thomas Carver. Dr. Cross wrote a paper. It was published in a small academic journal in 2005. It received little attention, but it existed, a record, a pattern, a shadow of proof. Thomas Carver retired in 1995. He was 57 years old. He gave a speech at the retirement dinner held in his honor at the Millbrook Community Center. He thanked the town. He thanked his family. He thanked God. He received a standing ovation. But that night when he returned home, he did not sleep. He sat in the kitchen in the dark, his hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. And for the first time in his life, Thomas Carver spoke aloud to the silence. He said, "I am sorry." No one heard him. But the house did, and the house remembered.
Silence is not passive. It is not the absence of sound. It is a structure, built brick by brick, reinforced with authority, maintained through ritual. And in Millbrook, Vermont, that structure was built by men who believed they were protecting something sacred, not truth, not justice, but order. In 1981, when Ruth Hallen filed her report, the machinery moved with practiced efficiency. First, the police chief, Donald Pierce, made a phone call. Second, the town doctor, Dr. Raymond Hollis, Thomas Carver's colleague, made a diagnosis. Third, the church elder, Reverend Paul Mitchum, made a recommendation. And fourth, the state psychiatrist, Dr. Leonard Voss, made it official. Ruth Hallen was not arrested. She was not charged. She was helped, voluntarily committed, for her own safety, for her own good. The paperwork was clean. Intake form. Patient presents with delusional ideation and persecutory beliefs. History of anxiety. Recommends inpatient observation. Diagnosis: acute psychotic episode, possibly triggered by underlying borderline personality disorder. Treatment plan: antipsychotic medication, group therapy, supervised visitation with minor child. Prognosis: guarded. Ruth Hallen's signature appeared at the bottom of the voluntary commitment form. She would later claim she did not remember signing it. She would later claim the pen had been placed in her hand while she was sedated. No one believed her, because by then she had been labeled, and labels, once applied, are nearly impossible to remove. But the records show something even more disturbing. Ruth Hallen was not the first woman committed after accusing Thomas Carver. In 1978, a woman named Marie Dunn, a 26-year-old waitress, told her sister that Dr. Carver had assaulted her during an exam. Her sister told their mother. Their mother told the priest. The priest told Marie that she needed to pray, that she needed to examine her own heart, that perhaps she had misunderstood. Marie stopped eating. She stopped sleeping.
Within 3 weeks, she had lost 12 pounds. Her family brought her to Dr. Raymond Hollis. Dr. Hollis diagnosed her with anorexia nervosa and referred her to the same psychiatric facility in Burlington. Marie was admitted on a Thursday. She was released 6 months later, medicated and silent. She never mentioned Thomas Carver again. She married in 1982. She had 2 children. She died in 1999 at the age of 47 of liver failure. The autopsy noted decades of psychotropic medication use. No one asked why she had been medicated for 21 years. The men who protected Thomas Carver were not monsters. They were ordinary men, fathers, husbands, churchgoers, men who believed they were doing the right thing, men who believed that protecting one man's reputation was the same as protecting the town. Donald Pierce, the police chief, had 3 daughters. He coached their softball team. He walked them down the aisle at their weddings. He held his grandchildren with the kind of tenderness that comes from a life lived in service. But when Ruth Hallen came to his office in 1981, Donald Pierce made a choice. He chose his friend over a stranger. He chose the known over the unknown. He chose the story that allowed him to sleep at night. And for 23 years, he did sleep. Until 2004. That year, Donald Pierce, now 71 and retired, suffered a stroke. It was mild. He recovered his speech. He regained most of his mobility. But something in his memory had shifted. His wife noticed it first. He would wake in the middle of the night, confused. He would ask her, "Did I do the right thing?" She would ask, "About what?" He would not answer. One evening, 6 months after the stroke, Donald Pierce asked his eldest daughter to sit with him. He told her he needed to confess something. He told her about Ruth Hallen. He told her about the report he never filed. He told her about the phone call he made to Thomas Carver. He told her he had done it to protect the town. But now, he said, he wasn't sure what he had protected. His daughter listened. She did not speak. When he finished, she asked him, "Do you want to make this right?" He said, "I don't know how." She said, "You could tell the truth." He shook his head. "It's too late." And perhaps it was, but her daughter remembered. But the records show something even more disturbing. Ruth Hallen was not the only custodian of silence. Dr. Raymond Hollis, the town doctor who diagnosed Ruth Hallen as delusional, had his own secret. In 1976, a patient came to him with concerns about Dr. Carver. She did not use the word assault. She said she felt strange after her last appointment with him. She said she couldn't remember parts of the exam. She said her body felt wrong. Dr. Hollis told her that sedatives sometimes caused temporary amnesia. He told her it was normal. He told her not to worry. He did not report it. He did not investigate. He did not ask Dr. Carver about it, because Dr. Raymond Hollis understood something fundamental about power. To question a colleague is to question the system, and to question the system is to admit you are part of it. So he said nothing, and in saying nothing, he became complicit. The daughters of the silenced women grew up in a fog, not a metaphorical fog, a literal one, a fog of half-truths, evasions, and unanswered questions. Anna Hallen, Ruth's daughter, was 14 years old when her mother was committed. She was told her mother was sick. She was told her mother needed help. She was told it was best if she didn't visit too often. It might upset her. So Anna visited once a month. She sat across from her mother in a day room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Her mother would hold her hand. Her mother would smile. Her mother would say, "I'm getting better." But her eyes said something else. Anna could not name what she saw in those eyes, not then, but years later she would recognize it. Her mother was afraid. Not of the facility, not of the diagnosis, of being believed. Anna lived with her grandmother after her mother was committed. Her grandmother, Ruth's mother, a woman named Eleanor, did not speak of what had happened. She would say only, "Your mother is fragile. We must be gentle with her." But Anna noticed things. She noticed that her grandmother never went to Dr. Carver's clinic anymore. She noticed that her grandmother drove 40 miles to see a doctor in Burlington instead. She noticed that whenever Thomas Carver's name was mentioned, at church, at the grocery store, her grandmother's jaw would tighten. She asked her once, "Do you think Mama was telling the truth?" Her grandmother did not answer. She looked out the window, and after a long silence, she said, "It doesn't matter what I think." But the records show something even more disturbing. Anna Hallen was not the only child inheriting silence. There was Marie Dunn's daughter, a girl named Sophie, born in 1983. There was Ellen Maythew's daughter, a girl named Caroline, born in 1979. And there was a third girl, a girl named Emma Cross, born in 1985, whose mother, Patricia, had been a patient of Thomas Carver, but never filed a report. Patricia simply stopped going to doctors. She stopped taking her daughters for checkups. She homeschooled them to avoid mandatory health screenings. She told her husband she didn't trust modern medicine. He thought she was eccentric. He did not know she was terrified. Patricia died in 2001 at the age of 52 of untreated breast cancer. Her daughter, Emma, would later say, "My mother would rather die to see a doctor. I never understood why, until I did." In 2008, Anna Hallen, now 31 years old, began experiencing symptoms she could not explain: chronic insomnia, night terrors, a visceral, irrational panic whenever she entered a medical building. Her hands would shake, her breath would shorten, her vision would narrow.
She went to a therapist. The therapist asked if she had experienced trauma. Anna said no. The therapist asked if anyone in her family had experienced trauma. Anna paused. "My mother." The therapist leaned forward. "Tell me about your mother." Anna told her what she knew. Her mother had accused a doctor. Her mother had been institutionalized. Her mother had died when Anna was 14. The therapist asked, "Do you believe your mother?" Anna said, "I don't know. I was never told the full story." The therapist said, "Your body knows." Anna stared at her. "What do you mean?" The therapist explained something called epigenetic inheritance, the idea that trauma, severe unresolved trauma, could alter gene expression, that those changes could be passed to children, that the body could remember what the mind never knew. Anna listened, and for the first time in her life, something made sense. She began researching. She found studies on Holocaust survivors' children. She found studies on descendants of genocide survivors in Rwanda. She found a name, Dr. Rachel Yehuda, a neuroscientist studying trauma and genetics. Anna reached out. Dr. Yehuda agreed to speak with her. But the records show something even more disturbing. Anna was not the only one experiencing unexplained symptoms. In 2009, she found Sophie Dunn through a support group for children of psychiatric patients. Sophie was 26. She had the same symptoms: insomnia, night terrors, medical phobia. Her mother, Marie Dunn, had been institutionalized in 1978. The same facility, the same diagnosis, the same town, the same doctor. In 2010, Anna found Caroline Mayhew. Caroline was 31. Same symptoms. Her mother, Ellen Mayhew, had fled Millbrook in 1984, had refused medical care for 15 years, had died of a stroke at 56. In 2011, Anna found Emma Cross. Emma was 26, same symptoms. Her mother, Patricia Cross, had never filed a report, but she had been Thomas Carver's patient in 1982, and she had spent the rest of her life avoiding doctors. The four women met in person in Burlington in the fall of 2011. They sat in a coffee shop and compared stories. None of them had known each other. None of them had known their mother's full stories, but their bodies had known. Their bodies had carried what their mothers could not speak. In 2012, Anna Hallen made a decision. She would find her mother's medical records. She drove to the Burlington Psychiatric Facility, now under new management, renamed, renovated. She requested access under the Freedom of Information Act. It took 6 months, but eventually a box arrived. Inside were her mother's intake forms, medication logs, therapy notes, and at the bottom, sealed in plastic, a 14-page letter, handwritten in her mother's hand. Anna sat in her car in the parking lot and read it. She read it twice. Then she called Sophie, then Caroline, then Emma. She said, "I have proof." The letter was precise. It named dates, described the exam room, detailed the sedation. It included something else, a list. 12 names, women Ruth had met in the psychiatric facility, women who had told her in whispers that they had been silenced too. Some by Thomas Carver, some by other doctors, all of them committed, all of them diagnosed as delusional, all of them erased. Ruth had written, "If no one believes me, maybe someone will believe them. If I write their names, maybe someone will remember." Anna read the names aloud to the other women. 3 of them were their mothers. But the records show something even more disturbing. Of the 12 names on Ruth's list, 9 of the women were dead, before the age of 60. 3 from suicide, 2 from liver failure, 1 from a stroke, 3 from cancer, untreated because they refused to see doctors. The remaining 3 were alive, but unreachable. 1 had dementia, 1 refused to speak about the past, and 1, when Anna finally tracked her down in 2013, said only, "I have spent 40 years trying to forget. Please don't make me remember." In 2014, Anna Hallen and the 3 other women made a decision. They would go public, not for justice. Justice, they understood, was impossible. Thomas Carver was 76 years old. The statute of limitations had long expired. The witnesses were dead or discredited. The system that had protected him was still in place. But they would go public anyway, not for justice, for witness, because silence, they had learned, is a kind of death, and witness, even decades late, is a kind of resurrection.
There is a question that haunts the children of trauma. How can I remember what I never knew? For decades, psychology offered no answer. Trauma, it was believed, lived in the mind, in memory, in narrative, in the stories we tell ourselves about what happened. But the body tells a different story. In the early 2000s, a neuroscientist named Dr. Rachel Yehuda began studying the children of Holocaust survivors. She wanted to understand why so many of them, people born decades after the war, who had never experienced the camps, suffered from PTSD, nightmares, hypervigilance, an inexplicable sense of dread. She collected blood samples, she analyzed cortisol levels, she mapped gene expression, and what she found changed everything. The children of Holocaust survivors had altered stress hormone profiles, not because they had experienced trauma, but because their parents had. The trauma had changed the parents' biology, and those changes had been passed down, not through memory, through genes. Dr. Yehuda called it epigenetic inheritance, the idea that extreme stress could modify how genes are expressed, switching some on, others off, and that those modifications could be transmitted to the next generation. It was not damage to the DNA itself, it was damage to the instructions for reading the DNA. like a book whose words remain unchanged, but whose punctuation has been rewritten. The meaning shifts, the body responds, and the child inherits not the memory of trauma, but the biology of it. But the records show something even more disturbing. Epigenetic inheritance is not limited to Holocaust survivors. Studies have documented it in the descendants of famine survivors in the Netherlands, the children of genocide survivors in Rwanda, the grandchildren of enslaved people in the United States, the descendants of indigenous people forcibly removed from their families. The body, it turns out, does not forget. Even when the mind has no memory, even when the story has been erased, the body remembers, and it passes that memory forward. In 2011, Anna Hallen contacted Dr. Rachel Yehuda. She explained who she was. She explained what had happened to her mother. She explained the symptoms she and 3 other women shared. Dr. Yehuda listened. Then she said, "I would like to study you." The study took 2 years. Anna, Sophie, Caroline, and Emma submitted blood samples. They completed psychological assessments. They provided family medical histories. And in 2013, Dr. Yehuda published her findings in a small academic journal. The paper was titled Epigenetic Markers of Maternal Trauma in Daughters of Institutionalized Sexual Assault Survivors. It received little attention outside academic circles, but for the 4 women, it was vindication. The study found that all 4 women had elevated baseline cortisol levels. Their stress response systems were hyperactive, constantly vigilant, constantly prepared for threat, not because they had experienced trauma themselves, but because their parents had. The study also found alterations in the expression of genes related to fear response, memory consolidation, sleep regulation, immune function. The pattern was unmistakable. These women were not imagining their symptoms. They were not weak. They were not broken. They were carrying something, a biological inheritance, a testimony written in flesh and blood. Anna read the study 3 times. Then she called her grandmother, Ruth's mother, Eleanor, now 84 years old. She said, "Grandma, I need to ask you something. Did my mother tell the truth?" There was a long silence. Then Eleanor said, "Yes." Anna's breath caught. "You knew?" "I knew." "Why didn't you believe her?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "I did believe her, but believing wasn't enough. The town didn't believe her. The police didn't believe her. The church didn't believe her. And She stopped. "I chose to protect you. I thought if we stayed quiet, if we didn't fight, maybe you could have a normal life." Anna closed her eyes. "But I didn't, Grandma. I carried it anyway." Eleanor began to cry. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But the records show something even more disturbing. Eleanor was not the only family member who knew. Ruth's younger sister, a woman named Margaret Collier, had also known. In 1981, when Ruth was committed, Margaret confronted Thomas Carver. She went to his clinic. She demanded to see him. When he came out to the waiting room, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're a monster, and one day everyone will know." Thomas Carver did not respond. He simply turned and walked back into his office. The receptionist asked Margaret to leave. Margaret did. She never spoke of it again. She moved to California in 1983. She changed her last name. She cut off contact with her family. She never explained why. In 2014, Anna tracked her down. Margaret was 68 years old. She lived alone in a small apartment in San Diego. Anna called her. Margaret answered. Anna said, "Aunt Margaret, this is Anna, Ruth's daughter." Silence. Then, "I wondered when you'd find me." They talked for 3 hours. Margaret told her everything. She told her about confronting Carver. She told her about the way the town turned on her afterward. She told her about the threatening phone calls. She told her about the brick thrown through her window with a note that said, "Leave it alone." She told her why she fled. And then she said, "I've been waiting for 40 years for someone to believe your mother. I'm glad it's you." While the daughters were uncovering the truth, Thomas Carver was unraveling. In 2010, at the age of 72, Thomas Carver began experiencing severe insomnia, not the kind where you wake once or twice, the kind where you do not sleep at all. 3 days, 4 days, a week. His wife Margaret begged him to see a doctor. He refused. He would sit in the kitchen at night, the lights off, staring at the wall. Margaret would find him there at dawn, unmoving. "Tom, you need help." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't slept in a week." "I said I'm fine."
By 2012, the insomnia had evolved into something worse. Hallucinations. Not visual ones, at least not at first. Auditory ones. He heard voices. Women's voices. Whispering. He could not make out the words, but he knew they were speaking to him. He would spin around, searching for the source. No one there. Margaret asked him what he was hearing. He told her it was nothing. Tinnitus, maybe. But it wasn't tinnitus, because the voices knew his name. By 2015, the hallucinations had become visual. He began seeing shadows, not in the dark, in broad daylight. Figures standing at the edges of rooms, figures sitting in chairs, figures watching him. Always women, always silent, always staring. He told his son, Michael Carver, now 50 years old, that he thought he was losing his mind. Michael took him to a neurologist. The neurologist ran tests, MRI, CT scan, cognitive assessment. The results showed early-stage neurodegeneration, possible Lewy body dementia. The neurologist prescribed medication. Thomas took it for a week, then stopped, because the medication made the voices quieter, and Thomas Carver, by then, did not want them to be quiet. He wanted them to speak. He wanted to hear what they were saying. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2016, Thomas Carver began writing. Not letters, not journals, just names, on scraps of paper, on the backs of envelopes, on the margins of newspapers. Margaret found them everywhere. Ruth Hallen, Marie Dunn, Ellen Mayhew, Patricia Cross. Names she did not recognize, names Thomas never explained. She asked him once, "Who are these people?" He looked at her. His eyes were hollow. "I don't remember." But he kept writing them, as if the act of writing could undo what had been done, as if naming them could bring them back, as if confession, silent, private, unwitnessed, could grant him absolution. In 2017, Thomas Carver did something no one expected. He went to confession. The priest, a young man named Father David Brennan, newly assigned to Millbrook, had never met Thomas Carver before. He knew him only by reputation, a retired doctor, a pillar of the community, a man who had served the town for decades. Thomas entered the confessional on a Tuesday afternoon. Father Brennan could hear him breathing on the other side of the screen, heavy, labored, as if every breath cost him something. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Father Brennan waited. "It has been many years since my last confession." Silence. Then, I have hurt people, many people. I hurt them, and I silenced them, and I let the world forget them. Father Brennan leaned forward. Tell me what you've done. And Thomas Carver told him. He named 14 women. He described the sedation. He described the years of silence. He described the machinery that protected him. He described the nights he could not sleep. He described the voices. He described the shadows. And then he said, I am dying, Father, and I am afraid. Father Brennan sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, What you have told me is not just sin. It is crime. You must confess to the law. Thomas Carver shook his head. I cannot. Then you cannot receive absolution. I know. Father Brennan's voice hardened. Then why are you here? Thomas Carver's voice cracked. Because I need someone to know. I need someone to remember them. Father Brennan did not grant absolution, but he did something else. He broke the seal of confession. In Catholic doctrine, the seal of confession is absolute. A priest may never reveal what is said under any circumstances. But Father Brennan was young, and he believed that justice mattered more than doctrine. He contacted the diocese. He contacted the police. He contacted the Vermont Attorney General's office. He told them what Thomas Carver had confessed. The response was swift. The diocese suspended Father Brennan. The police opened an investigation. The Attorney General assigned a prosecutor. And Thomas Carver was summoned for questioning. But before the interview could take place, Thomas Carver died. He died in his sleep on a Sunday morning in November 2017. He was 79 years old. The autopsy listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest, but it noted something else: advanced neurodegeneration. His brain had been deteriorating for years. Entire regions responsible for impulse control, moral reasoning, and emotional regulation had atrophied. The neurologist who reviewed the autopsy said it looked like his brain had been eating itself, as if his own mind had been waging war against him. But the records show something even more disturbing. Thomas Carver's confession to Father Brennan included 6 names that had never appeared in any report. 6 women no one had known about. Anna Hallen began searching for them. 2 were dead. 1 had dementia. 2 refused to speak. But 1, a woman named Gloria Trask, now 71, agreed to meet. Gloria told Anna what had happened. It was 1979. She was 23 years old. She had gone to Dr. Carver for back pain. He sedated her. She awake with no memory of the exam, but her body knew. She never went back. She never told anyone. She moved away 6 months later. She spent 40 years trying to forget. And then, in 2018, she received a phone call from Anna Hallen. Your name was on a list. Gloria asked, what list? The list of women Thomas Carver confessed to hurting. Gloria was silent for a long time. Then she said, I thought I was the only one. In 2019, Anna Hallen found something that stopped her cold. She was reviewing the list of names Thomas Carver confessed to hurting. 14 names. 13 of them she had accounted for, but 1 remained unidentified. A first name only, Jane. No last name, no date, no details, just Jane. Anna spent 6 months searching. She cross-referenced hospital records. She interviewed former clinic staff. She posted in online forums for survivors. Nothing. And then, in the spring of 2020, she received an anonymous email. No subject line, just 2 sentences. I am Jane. I would like to speak. They met in a diner in Burlington. Jane was 68 years old. She had gray hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses. She looked like someone's grandmother. She was. She told Anna what had happened. It was 1974. She was 22 years old. She had just moved to Millbrook to teach at the elementary school. She went to Dr. Carver for a physical. He sedated her. She awake in the exam room, alone, her clothes rearranged. She told no one. She finished the school year. She left Millbrook and never returned. She changed her name. She married. She had children. She never told them. "Why are you telling me now?" Anna asked. Jane looked at her. "Because you believed your mother, and I want my daughters to believe me." But the records show something even more disturbing. Jane had 2 daughters. Both of them, like Anna, Sophie, Caroline, and Emma, had unexplained symptoms: chronic anxiety, insomnia, medical phobia. Neither of them knew why. Jane had never told them, but after meeting Anna, she did. She sat them down. She told them the truth. And one of her daughters, a woman named Sarah, 41 years old, said, "I always knew something had happened to you. I just didn't know what." Jane asked, "How did you know?" Sarah said, "Because I felt it in my body, like a memory I didn't have."
By the end of 2020, Anna Hallen had identified all 14 women. 9 were dead, 5 were alive, and all of them, every single one, had daughters who carried the same unexplained symptoms, the same biology, the same inheritance. The body, Anna understood, was not just a vessel. It was an archive, a living record of what had been done, a testament that could not be erased, even when the women were silenced, even when the law did nothing, even when the town forgot. The body remembered, and it passed that memory forward, not as a curse, but as evidence. There is a belief, comforting in its simplicity, that guilt is a choice, that a person can commit evil and simply choose not to feel remorse, that conscience can be turned off like a switch. But the brain does not work that way. Guilt is not housed in the soul. It is housed in the prefrontal cortex, in the anterior cingulate, in the limbic system. And when those systems are forced to suppress truth day after day, year after year, they begin to break down, not metaphorically, literally. Thomas Carver's psychological collapse did not begin in 2010 when the insomnia started. It began in 1973, the first time he sedated a patient and crossed a line he could never uncross. But the mind is patient. It will carry a secret for decades. It will bury it beneath routine, beneath justification, beneath the architecture of a normal life, until one day, without warning, the weight becomes unbearable and the architecture collapses. Thomas Carver retired in 1995. He was 57 years old, healthy, respected, honored. At his retirement dinner, the mayor of Millbrook gave a speech. Dr. Carver has served this town for nearly 30 years. He has delivered our children. He has cared for our elderly. He has been a pillar of this community. The room applauded. Thomas smiled, but his hands, hidden beneath the table, were shaking.
In the months that followed, Thomas began to experience something he had not felt in years: boredom. Not the ordinary kind, the suffocating kind, the kind that comes when you realize you no longer have the structure that held you together. He tried to fill the time. He volunteered at the church. He took up woodworking. He traveled with Margaret, a week in Maine, a long weekend in Boston. But none of it worked, because without the clinic, without the routine, without the constant distraction of patients and paperwork and phone calls, there was nothing left but himself, and himself was not good company. By 1997, Thomas had stopped sleeping well. Not insomnia, not yet, just restlessness. He would wake at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Margaret would ask if he was all right. He would say yes, but he was not. Because in the silence of those early morning hours, the voices began. Not audible voices, not yet, just thoughts that felt like they came from outside himself. Intrusive thoughts. You hurt them. They trusted you. They will never forget. He would shake his head, try to think of something else, but the thoughts would return, persistent, relentless, like water finding cracks in stone. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 1999, Thomas Carver made an appointment with a psychiatrist in Burlington. He did not tell Margaret. He drove 40 miles, paid in cash, and used a false name. The psychiatrist, Dr. Linda Morse, took notes during the session. Those notes, obtained years later through a legal request, revealed the following. Patient presents with intrusive thoughts, mild paranoia, and early signs of compulsive behavior. Reports difficulty sleeping. Reports feelings of being watched. Denies suicidal ideation. Denies history of trauma. Affect is flat. Eye contact is minimal. Patient declined to provide full history. Recommended SSRI and follow-up in 2 weeks. Thomas never returned. He filled the prescription. He took the medication for 3 weeks, then stopped, because the SSRI did something he could not tolerate. It quieted the thoughts, and in that quiet, Thomas Carver felt something worse than guilt. He felt nothing, and nothing felt like erasure. Like the women he had silenced were being silenced again, this time inside his own mind. So he stopped the medication and let the thoughts return. By 2005, the intrusive thoughts had evolved into compulsions. Hand-washing. It started subtly, washing his hands after using the bathroom, then before meals, then after touching doorknobs, then after shaking hands, then after touching anything. By 2007, he was washing his hands 40, 50, 60 times a day. The skin cracked, bled, scarred. Margaret bought him lotion. He used it, but he kept washing. She asked him why. He said, "I don't know. I just feel dirty." Dirty how? He could not explain, because it was not dirt he felt. It was residue. The residue of hands that had touched without consent. The residue of power that left no visible trace. The residue of acts the law never named. In 2008, Thomas developed a second compulsion, checking. He would check the locks on the doors, once, twice, 10 times. He would check the windows. He would check the stove. He would walk through the house at night, checking every room, every corner, every shadow. Margaret asked him what he was looking for. He said, "I don't know. I just need to make sure." Make sure of what? He did not answer, because he did not know. Or perhaps he did know, but could not say it aloud. He was checking to see if he was alone, if the women he had silenced had found a way back. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2009, Thomas Carver's son, Michael, now 44 years old, and the mayor of Millbrook, visited his parents for dinner. He noticed something strange. His father would not sit with his back to the door. He insisted on sitting where he could see the entire room. He asked him why. He said, "I like to see who's coming." But no one was coming. The house was quiet. The town was quiet. And yet Thomas Carver sat like a man under siege. In 2010, the insomnia became total. Thomas stopped sleeping entirely, not for one night, for weeks. Margaret begged him to see a doctor. He refused. She threatened to call an ambulance. He told her if she did, he would leave. So she stopped asking, and Thomas Carver sat alone in the kitchen night after night, his eyes open, his mind unraveling. The hallucinations began in the 3rd week. Auditory at first. He heard footsteps in the hall. He would get up, check, no one there. He heard doors opening. He would check, all closed. He heard his name whispered, Thomas. He would turn, nothing. By the 4th week, the hallucinations became visual. He began seeing figures, not clear ones, shadows, standing at the edges of rooms, sitting in chairs, watching him. He would blink, they would remain. He would look away, look back, still there. He told Margaret he thought he was losing his mind. She took him to a neurologist. The neurologist, Dr. Alan Foster, ran tests, MRI, EEG, cognitive assessment. The results showed early-stage neurodegeneration, likely Lewy body dementia, though it was too early to confirm. Dr. Foster explained, "Your brain is producing abnormal protein deposits. They're disrupting normal function. This can cause hallucinations, sleep disturbances, motor issues." Thomas asked, "Is there a cure?" "No, but we can manage the symptoms." Thomas nodded. He took the prescription. He never filled it. Because by then, Thomas Carver understood something. The hallucinations were not symptoms. They were witnesses. He began talking to them, at first quietly, under his breath, then aloud. Margaret would hear him in the kitchen at 3 a.m., talking to no one. I know you're there. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix it." She asked him who he was talking to. He said no one, but that was not true. He was talking to the women, the ones he had silenced, the ones who had never left. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2012, Thomas Carver began keeping a journal, not a diary, just fragments, sentences, names, apologies. Margaret found it in 2015 after his condition worsened. She read it. She wished she hadn't.
The entries were disjointed, repetitive, obsessive. Ruth trusted me. I took something I had no right to take. They are in the house now. I see them. They do not speak, but I know what they want. I am not afraid of death. I am afraid of what comes after. Margaret does not know. Michael does not know. No one knows, except them. And they will never leave. One entry, dated November 2014, read, "I tried to count how many. I cannot remember. 14? More? The faces blur, but the feeling does not. I know what I did. I know what I am." And the final entry, undated, I am already dead. I have been dead for years. The body just hasn't caught up yet. Thomas Carver died on November 12, 2017. He was found in his bed, peaceful, Margaret said, as if he had finally been allowed to rest. The autopsy was routine. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. But the neuropathology report revealed something extraordinary. Dr. Sandra Chen, the forensic neuropathologist who examined Thomas Carver's brain, filed the following report. Severe cortical atrophy, extensive Lewy body pathology throughout the frontal and temporal lobes, marked degeneration of the anterior cingulate cortex, region associated with empathy, moral reasoning, and emotional regulation, hippocampal shrinkage consistent with chronic stress exposure, evidence of sustained glucocorticoid dysregulation, brain mass reduced by approximately 18% compared to average for age and sex. In layman's terms, Thomas Carver's brain had been destroying itself. The regions responsible for guilt, empathy, and moral judgment had atrophied to the point of near total dysfunction. It was as if his mind had been waging a war against itself for decades, and his mind had lost. Dr. Chen included a note in her report. The degree of neurodegeneration observed is consistent with prolonged exposure to extreme psychological stress. While Lewy body dementia can occur spontaneously, the pattern here suggests a possible environmental or behavioral trigger. Further research needed. Anna Hallen obtained a copy of the autopsy report in 2018. She shared it with Dr. Rachel Yehuda. Dr. Yehuda reviewed it. Then she said something that stayed with Anna. Guilt isn't just psychological, it's physiological. And when guilt is suppressed, when it's denied outlet, denied witness, denied resolution, it doesn't disappear. It turns inward, and it begins to consume the brain itself. Anna asked, so his brain was punishing him? Dr. Yehuda paused. No, his brain was trying to protect him by shutting down the regions that forced him to remember, but in doing so, it destroyed him. In 2019, 2 years after Thomas Carver's death, Father David Brennan, the priest who had heard his confession, made a decision. He released a recording. Father Brennan had secretly recorded the confession. It violated canon law. It violated the seal of the confessional. It likely violated state law. But Father Brennan no longer cared. He had been suspended by the diocese. He had lost his vocation, and he decided that the truth mattered more than his career. The recording was 18 minutes long. Father Brennan sent it to Anna Hallen. He included a note. I do not know if this will help, but the women deserve to be heard, even if the only voice left is his. Anna listened to the recording once. She shared it with Sophie, Caroline, Emma, and the other daughters. They listened together in a conference room in Burlington. Thomas Carver's voice was thin, raspy, fragile. He named the women. He described what he had done. He described how he had silenced them. And then, near the end, he said, I thought I could live with it. I thought I could bury it. But the body does not forget, and neither does the mind. I see them now, every day, every night. They are waiting, and I know that when I die, they will still be waiting. The daughters sat in silence after the recording ended. Finally, Emma spoke. He died too easily. Sophie shook her head. No, he didn't. He died slowly, for 40 years. Anna said, He died the way he made them live, in silence, in fear, in a body that wouldn't let him forget.
There are two kinds of inheritance. The first is biological, written in genes, passed through blood, inescapable. The second is moral, written in silence, passed through choice, equally inescapable. Michael Carver was 19 years old in 1984, the year Ruth Hallen accused his father, the year the police did nothing, the year the town chose forgetting over justice. Michael was home from college that summer. He heard the rumors. Everyone did. At the diner, at the gas station, at church. Did you hear about Dr. Carver? I heard Ruth Hallen is saying things. I heard she's been committed. I heard she's unstable. Michael heard it all, and he said nothing. Not because he didn't know, but because knowing required a choice. And Michael Carver chose his father, not out of love, not out of loyalty, out of convenience. Because believing Ruth Hallen would have required Michael to dismantle his entire life, his childhood, his family, his name. And so he chose the easier story, the story where his father was a good man, the story where Ruth Hallen was confused, the story where nothing had to change. But the body remembers, and so does the mind. Even when you choose not to see, something inside you knows, and that knowing, unspoken, unacknowledged, buried, begins to corrode you from the inside. Michael Carver followed in his father's footsteps, not in medicine, in power. He studied political science at the University of Vermont. He graduated in 1987. He returned to Millbrook and ran for town council in 1992. He won. By 2003, he was mayor. By 2010, he was the most powerful man in Millbrook, just like his father had been. Michael was good at his job. He was diplomatic, pragmatic, well-liked. He modernized the town's infrastructure. He brought in new businesses. He expanded the school budget. He was, by all accounts, a competent leader. But there was something hollow about him, something his wife noticed, something his children noticed, a distance, a coldness, an inability to be fully present. His wife, Karen, would later say, Michael was always somewhere else. Even when he was sitting right next to you, he was somewhere else. His daughter, Emily, would later say, my father never talked about his childhood. I asked him once about grandfather Thomas. He said he was a good man and then changed the subject. He never brought it up again. Michael Carver had built a life on a foundation of silence, and silence, like rot, spreads. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2009, a woman named Linda Frost, the same woman who had questioned Reverend Mitchum in 1981, approached Michael Carver at a town hall meeting. She was 68 years old now, retired, angry. She stood during the public comment period and said, Mr. Mayor, I have a question. Do you remember Ruth Hallen? The room went silent. Michael paused. I'm not sure I know who you're referring to. Linda's voice hardened. Ruth Hallen. She accused your father of assault in 1981. She was institutionalized. She died 10 years later. Do you remember her? Michael's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. So you do remember? I remember rumors. I don't remember facts. Linda stepped closer to the microphone. Your father hurt women, and this town protected him. And you knew. You were 19. You heard the rumors I did, and you said nothing.
Michael's voice was calm, controlled. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I will not engage in baseless accusations against my late father." Linda stared at him. "You're just like them. You're just like all of them." She walked out. Michael continued the meeting as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. A crack had formed, small, barely visible, but a crack nonetheless. In 2014, Anna Hallen made a decision. She would confront Michael Carver. She did not go alone. She brought Sophie Dunn. She brought Caroline Mayhew. She brought Emma Cross. And she brought the letter, the autopsy report, the list of names. They requested a meeting with the mayor. His assistant said he was unavailable. They requested again, unavailable. On the third attempt, Anna said, "Tell him if he doesn't meet with us, we will hold a press conference on the steps of Town Hall." Michael agreed to meet. The meeting was held in his office on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2014. Michael sat behind his desk. The four women sat across from him. Anna placed the documents on the desk. "This is a letter your father's victims wrote. This is a list of their names. This is proof of what he did." Michael did not touch the documents. "I've seen this before." And my father is dead. There is nothing to be done." Anna leaned forward. "Your father confessed to a priest. He named 14 women. He described what he did. He knew, and you knew." Michael's face remained expressionless. "I did not know." "You were 19 when Ruth Hallen accused him. You heard the rumors. You said nothing." "I was a teenager. I believed my father." Sophie spoke next. "My mother was institutionalized because of your father. She died at 47. I grew up without her. And you built a career on his name." Michael's voice was flat. "I am not responsible for what my father did." Caroline's voice shook. "But you are responsible for what you didn't do. You could have spoken. You could have investigated. You could have believed the women. But you didn't. You chose silence, just like your father did." Michael stood. "This meeting is over." Anna did not move. "We are going public. We are holding a memorial for the women your father hurt. We are demanding the town acknowledge what happened, and we are asking you, as mayor, to issue a formal apology." Michael's hands gripped the edge of his desk. "I will do no such thing." "Then we will make sure everyone knows that you knew, that you stayed silent, that you protected his legacy." Michael's voice rose. "My father was a good man. He made mistakes, but he was a good man." Emma stood. "A good man doesn't drug women. A good man doesn't silence them. A good man doesn't let them die forgotten." Michael said nothing. The women left. But the records show something even more disturbing. That night, Michael Carver went home and told his wife what had happened. Karen listened. Then she said, "Did your father do it?" Michael did not answer. "Michael, did he do it?" He looked at her. "I don't know." "You do know." Michael's voice cracked. "What was I supposed to do? Destroy his reputation? Destroy our family? Destroy everything he built?" Karen stared at him. "He destroyed those women, and you let him." Michael said nothing. Karen left the room. They did not speak for 3 days. In November 2014, Anna Hallen held a press conference, not on the steps of Town Hall, in the parking lot of the old clinic where Thomas Carver had practiced for 30 years. She stood before a microphone. Behind her, Sophie Dunn, Caroline Mayhew,
Emma Cross, and 3 other daughters of Thomas Carver's victims. Behind them, a banner that read, "Remember the Silent."
Anna spoke first. "My name is Anna Hallen. My mother was Ruth Hallen. In 1981, she accused Dr. Thomas Carver of sexual assault. She was institutionalized. She died 10 years later. She was 38 years old." She paused. For 40 years, this town buried her story. For 40 years, this town chose silence over justice. For 40 years, my mother and 13 other women were erased. She held up the letter. "This is my mother's testimony, written in 1985, sealed in a filing cabinet for 22 years. It names 14 women. 9 of them are dead. All of them were silenced." She looked directly at the camera. "We are here to say their names. We are here to demand acknowledgement. We are here to end the silence." One by one, the daughters spoke. Sophie named her mother, Marie Dunn. Caroline named her mother, Ellen Mayhew. Emma named her mother, Patricia Cross. The others followed. 14 names, spoken aloud, witnessed. The press conference was covered by local news, then regional news, then national news. By the end of the week, the story had reached the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and NPR. The headline in the Times read, "A Vermont town confronts a buried past, the women silenced by a respected doctor, and the daughters demanding justice." But the records show something even more disturbing. Michael Carver did not respond publicly, but privately he began to unravel. His staff noticed it first. He stopped attending meetings. He stopped returning calls. He would sit in his office for hours, staring at nothing. His assistant, a woman named Janet Morris, found him one afternoon with his head in his hands. "Mr. Mayor, are you all right?" He did not look up. "I should have said something." "What?" "In 1984, I should have said something." Janet did not know what to say. Michael looked at her. "Do you think it's too late?" She paused. "I don't know." On December 15, 2014, Michael Carver resigned as mayor of Millbrook. He issued a brief statement. "After much reflection, I have decided to step down as mayor, effective immediately. I thank the town for the opportunity to serve. I wish you all the best." No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the press conference, the accusations, or his father's crimes. Just resignation. But 3 weeks later, Michael did something unexpected. He wrote a letter, not to the town, to Anna Hallen. The letter was handwritten, 4 pages. It arrived in Anna's mailbox on January 8, 2015. She read it 3 times before she could absorb what it said. The letter began, "Anna, I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not expect you to believe me, but I need to tell you the truth. I knew. I have always known." Michael described hearing the rumors in 1984. He described confronting his father. He described his father's response. "People lie, Michael. People lie all the time. You have to decide who you believe." Michael wrote, "I believed him, not because I thought Ruth was lying, but because it was easier, because I was 19 and afraid and selfish, and I have spent 30 years carrying that choice." He continued, "I thought if I built a good life, if I served the town, if I raised a family, if I did good work, it would balance out, that I could make up for what I didn't do. But I was wrong. You cannot balance silence with good deeds. Silence is its own crime." The letter ended, "I am sorry. I know that means nothing,
but I am sorry." Anna showed the letter to the other women. Sophie said, "He's only sorry because we exposed him." Caroline said, "He had 30 years to speak. He chose not to." Emma said, "An apology doesn't undo the damage." Anna said nothing, but she kept the letter. But the records show something even more disturbing. 6 months after resigning, Michael Carver suffered a heart attack. He was 50 years old. He survived, but the cardiologist noted something unusual in his medical file. Patient presents with stress-induced cardiomyopathy, often referred to as broken heart syndrome, typically caused by severe emotional trauma or chronic psychological stress. Michael's wife later said, "He never recovered from stepping down. He said he felt like he was carrying a weight he couldn't put down. I think it killed him, slowly." Michael Carver died on March 3, 2016. He was 51 years old. The official cause of death, cardiac arrest. But those who knew him understood. He died of guilt, not the kind that seeks redemption, the kind that eats you from the inside. After Michael's death, his widow, Karen Carver, cleaned out his office. In the back of a filing cabinet, she found a box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all handwritten, all addressed to women whose names Karen did not recognize. She opened one. "Dear Ruth Hallen, I am writing to tell you that I believe you. I believed you in 1984, and I said nothing. I am sorry. I do not know if apologies matter after so much time, but I am sorry." Another. "Dear Marie Dunn, I heard what happened to you. I heard the rumors. I told myself they were just rumors, but they weren't, and I should have spoken. I am sorry." Another. "Dear Ellen Mayhew, I do not know if you are still alive, but if you are, I want you to know I knew, and I stayed silent, and that silence was a choice, and I am sorry." Karen counted the letters. 14, one for each woman, none of them mailed, all of them written, some dated as far back as 2005, some as recent as 2015. Karen called Anna Hallen. She told her about the letters. Anna asked, "Can I see them?" Karen said, "I think you should." Anna read all of them. Then she shared them with the other daughters. They sat together in silence. Finally, Sophie said, "He wrote them, but he never sent them. What does that mean?" Anna said, "It means he wanted to be forgiven, but he didn't believe he deserved it." Emma said, "He was right." But Caroline shook her head. "No, he was wrong. Not about deserving forgiveness, about the letters. He should have sent them. Even if the women never replied, even if they cursed him, he should have sent them. Because silence, again, is what killed them."
Justice delayed is not justice denied. It is justice transformed. When the law fails, when the system protects the guilty, when silence becomes policy, justice does not disappear. It waits. It migrates. It finds new forms. For 40 years, the women Thomas Carver hurt received no justice from courts, no justice from police, no justice from the church, no justice from the town. But in 2015, something changed. Not because the system corrected itself, but because the daughters refused to inherit silence. They had no legal recourse. Thomas Carver was dead. The statute of limitations had expired decades ago. Most of the witnesses were dead or unwilling to testify. The system offered them nothing, so they built their own justice. Not through punishment,
through witness, not through vengeance, through memory, not through the law, through ritual. In January 2015, Anna Hallen sent a letter to the town council of Millbrook. It was formal, direct, non-negotiable. To the Millbrook Town Council, we, the daughters of the women hurt by Dr. Thomas Carver, formally request permission to hold a public memorial service on the grounds of Millbrook Town Hall. The service will honor the 14 women who were silenced, erased, and forgotten. We request that the town acknowledge what happened. We request that the church issue a formal apology. We request that Dr. Thomas Carver's name be removed from all public buildings and honors. This is not a request for legal action. This is a request for acknowledgement. We await your response. The letter was signed by Anna, Sophie, Caroline, Emma, and 6 other daughters. The town council debated the request for 3 weeks. Some members argued it would reopen old wounds. Some argued it would damage the town's reputation. Some argued it was unnecessary. The man is dead, let it rest. But others argued differently. A council member named Rebecca Walsh, a woman in her 40s who had grown up in Millbrook, stood during the debate and said, "I was 10 years old when Ruth Hallen was committed. I remember my mother whispering about it with her friends. I remember the way the women in town stopped going to Dr. Carver's clinic. I remember the way no one talked about it. And I remember feeling, even as a child, that something was wrong, that something was being hidden. And it was." She paused. "These women are not asking for revenge. They are asking to be seen. And if we deny them that, we are complicit again." The vote was 5-4 in favor. Permission granted. But the records show something even more disturbing. The decision to grant permission was not unanimous in the community. In the weeks following the vote, Anna received anonymous letters. Some were supportive, but others were hostile. One letter read, "Your mother was a liar. Your father was a liar. You are a liar. Leave this town alone." Another, "Dr. Carver was a good man. You are destroying his legacy for attention. Shame on you." Another, "Some things are better left buried. You are digging up pain for no reason. Stop." Anna kept the letters. She did not respond, but she did not stop. The memorial was scheduled for May 15, 2015. The daughters worked for 3 months to prepare. They designed a banner, simple, white fabric, black text. It read, "In memory of the silent, Ruth Hallen, Marie Dunn, Ellen Mayview, Patricia Cross, Gloria Trask, Jane." The remaining 8 names followed, 14 in total. They collected photographs, not of the assaults, not of the trauma, of the women as they had been before. Ruth Hallen at her high school graduation, smiling, her hair in curls. Marie Dunn holding her infant daughter, her face soft with love. Ellen Mayview on her wedding day, her husband's arm around her waist. Patricia Cross in her garden, her hands covered in soil, her expression peaceful. The photographs were mounted on boards and displayed at the memorial. Beneath each photograph, a single sentence,
She was silenced. She is remembered. They invited the press. They invited survivors of sexual assault from across Vermont. They invited clergy. They invited town officials. They invited anyone who wanted to bear witness. And they sent a personal invitation to one person, Karen Carver, Michael's widow. Karen called Anna the day she received the invitation. "I don't know if I should come." Anna said, "That's your choice. Will people hate me?" "I don't know, but I won't." Karen was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I'll be there." May 15, 2015 was a clear day. The sky was blue. The air was warm. The trees were green. By 10 a.m., over 300 people had gathered on the lawn of Millbrook Town Hall. Some were locals. Some had driven from Burlington, from Boston, from as far as New York. Some were survivors. Some were family members of survivors. Some were simply people who believed that silence should not be allowed to win. The memorial was scheduled for 11 a.m. Anna Hallen stood at the podium. Behind her, the banner, the photographs, the names. She began, "We are here today to do something this town has refused to do for 40 years. We are here to see these women, to speak their names, to acknowledge what was done to them, and to say, 'We believe you.'" Her voice did not waver. For 40 years, these women were told they were lying. They were told they were confused. They were told they were sick. They were institutionalized, medicated, erased. And when they died in silence. She paused. "But we are their daughters, and we refuse to be silent." One by one, the daughters spoke. Sophie Dunn stood and said, "My mother, Marie Dunn, was 26 years old when she was assaulted. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She was institutionalized for 6 months. She was medicated for 21 years. She died at 47. She never told me what happened, but her body did." Caroline Mayview stood and said, "My mother, Ellen Mayview, fled this town in 1984. She refused to see a doctor for 15 years. She died of a stroke at 56 because she was too afraid to seek help. She never told me why, but I know now." Emma Cross stood and said, "My mother, Patricia Cross, homeschooled my sister and I to avoid mandatory health screenings. She died of untreated breast cancer at 52. She would rather die to see a doctor. I didn't understand, but I do now." Each daughter spoke. Each named her mother. Each told her story. When the last daughter finished, Anna returned to the podium. "We cannot undo what was done. We cannot bring these women back. But we can do one thing. We can make sure they are not forgotten. We can make sure their names are spoken. We can make sure their silence ends." She looked out at the crowd. "If you are here today, you are a witness, and witness is a form of justice." But the records show something even more disturbing.
During the memorial, a woman in her 70s approached the microphone. She had not been scheduled to speak, but she asked for permission. Anna nodded. The woman's name was Judith Greaves, the former town clerk, the woman who had received Ruth Hallen's letter in 2003 and locked it in a filing cabinet for 16 years. She stood at the microphone. Her hands shook. Her voice was barely audible. "My name is Judith Greaves. In 2003, I received a
a 14-page letter written by Ruth Hallen. It described everything that had happened to her. It named other women. It asked for help. She paused. I read it, and I locked it away. I told no one. I did nothing. Her voice cracked. I told myself I was protecting the town. I told myself it was too late. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did matter. And I was wrong. She looked at Anna. I am sorry. I know that's not enough, but I am sorry. Anna did not speak. She walked to the microphone. She stood beside Judith, and she said quietly, Thank you for saying it. 3 days after the memorial, the Diocese of Burlington issued a formal statement. It was read aloud at Sunday Mass in Millbrook by the current priest, Father David Brennan, the same priest who had broken the seal of confession. The statement read, The Diocese of Burlington acknowledges that between 1978 and 1990, multiple women came forward with allegations of sexual assault by Dr. Thomas Carver. These women sought help from the Church. They sought support. They sought justice. The Church failed them. Rather than investigate, we counseled silence. Rather than believe, we dismissed. Rather than act, we protected the reputation of a man over the safety of women. This was a sin, not just against these women, but against the gospel we claim to serve. We apologize. We ask forgiveness, and we commit to ensuring that such failures never happen again. The apology was met with mixed reactions. Some parishioners wept, some walked out, some stood and applauded. Anna was present. She sat in the back pew. When the statement ended, she did not applaud. She did not weep. She simply stood and walked out. Outside, a reporter asked her, Do you accept the Church's apology? Anna paused. I accept that they said it, but an apology doesn't undo 40 years of harm. It's a start, but it's only a start. But the records show something even more disturbing. The apology was not universally supported within the Church. Several parishioners, longtime members who had known Thomas Carver, sent letters to the diocese demanding the statement be retracted. One letter read, Dr. Carver was a devout Christian. He served this church for decades. These accusations are unproven. This apology dishonors his memory. Another, the women who accused him were troubled. The church should not be apologizing for protecting a good man from false accusations. The diocese did not retract the statement, but the division remained. In June 2015, the Millbrook Town Council voted to remove Thomas Carver's name from the East Wing of Millbrook Regional Hospital. The wing had been named in his honor in 1996, 1 year after his retirement. A bronze plaque had been mounted at the entrance. It read, The Thomas Carver Wing, in recognition of 30 years of dedicated service to the health and well-being of the Millbrook community. The plaque was removed on June 18, 2015. No ceremony, no announcement. It was simply taken down. The hospital administrator issued a brief statement. After careful consideration, the hospital has decided to rename the East Wing. It will now be called the Community Care Wing. We believe this better reflects our values and our commitment to all patients. Anna stood outside the hospital that day and watched as workers removed the plaque. She did not feel triumph. She felt tired. A journalist asked her, How does it feel to see his name removed? Anna paused. It doesn't feel like justice. It feels like acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is not the same as justice, but it's something. But the records show something even more disturbing. The removed plaque was not destroyed. It was placed in storage. In 2017, a group of donors petitioned the hospital to reinstall it. The petition was denied, but the plaque remains in storage, waiting. In August 2015, the Carver House, the white colonial on Ridgeway Lane that had been on the market for 11 years, was finally sold, not to a family, to a non-profit organization called Voices Unburdened. The organization specialized in trauma recovery. They purchased the house for $120,000, half its market value. Their plan, to convert it into a residential trauma recovery center, a place where survivors of sexual violence could come for treatment, therapy, and healing. Anna Hallen was on the board of directors. She stood on the porch of the house the day the sale finalized. She looked at the windows, the shutters, the door, and she thought, this house held silence for 40 years. Now it will hold witness. The center opened in January 2016. It was called the Ruth Hallen House.
There is a question that haunts every field of medicine. Can trauma be inherited? For centuries, the answer was no. Trauma, science believed, lived in the mind, in memory, in cognition, in learned behavior. You could not inherit what you had not experienced. But in the last 20 years, that certainty has collapsed, because the body, it turns out, does not distinguish between what you have lived and what your ancestors lived. The body remembers, and it encodes that memory not in neurons, but in genes. This is not metaphor. This is not folklore. This is biology. In 1991, a neuroscientist named Dr. Rachel Yehuda began studying the children of Holocaust survivors. She worked at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Her patients were the sons and daughters of people who had survived Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, people who had been starved, tortured, worked to death, people who had watched their families murdered, people who had survived the unsurvivable. Their children, born decades after the war, in safety in America, came to Dr. Yehuda with complaints, chronic anxiety, panic attacks, nightmares about events they had never witnessed, an inexplicable sense of dread. Dr. Yehuda ran tests. She measured cortisol levels, the body's primary stress hormone. She expected the children to have elevated cortisol, high stress, high anxiety, high cortisol. That was the pattern in PTSD. But the results showed the opposite. The children of Holocaust survivors had lower baseline cortisol. Their stress response systems were hyper-reactive. They were primed to interpret ordinary stress as life-threatening danger, as if their bodies were still living in the camps, even though they had never been there. Dr. Yehuda published her findings in 2015. The paper was titled Holocaust Exposure-Induced Intergenerational Effects on FKBP5 Methylation. In layman's terms, the trauma experienced by Holocaust survivors had altered the expression of a gene called FKBP5, a gene involved in regulating stress response. Those changes had been passed to their children. Not through stories, not through behavior, through DNA. But the records show something even more disturbing. Dr. Yehuda's findings were not an anomaly. Similar patterns have been documented in the descendants of survivors of the Dutch hunger winter of 1944 to 1945. The grandchildren of Confederate prisoners of war during the American Civil War, the children of Rwandan genocide survivors, the descendants of indigenous peoples forcibly removed from their families in Canada and the United States. The pattern is consistent. Trauma
alters biology, and biology can be inherited. The field is called epigenetics, the study of how genes are expressed, how they are turned on or off without changes to the DNA sequence itself. Think of DNA as a book. The words in the book do not change, but epigenetics controls which chapters are read, which are skipped, which are underlined, which are ignored. When a person experiences extreme trauma, their body produces massive amounts of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. These hormones flood the bloodstream. They reach every cell, and in certain cells, particularly in the brain and reproductive system, they trigger changes in gene expression. Small chemical tags called methyl groups attach to DNA. These tags do not alter the genetic code, but they alter how the code is read. They turn certain genes on, others off. Most of the time, these changes are temporary. The body recovers, the tags are removed. But in cases of extreme, sustained trauma, especially trauma involving helplessness, violation, or erasure, the changes can become permanent. They embed themselves in the genome, and when a child is conceived, some of those changes are passed down. This is not speculation. This is measurable. Researchers can now identify specific epigenetic markers associated with trauma. They can look at a blood sample and see evidence of inherited stress. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2016, Dr. Yehuda was contacted by Anna Hallen. Anna explained her situation. Her mother had been assaulted, silenced, and institutionalized. Anna had never been told the full story, but she had symptoms. So did 3 other women, the daughters of Thomas Carver's other victims. Dr. Yehuda agreed to study them. She collected blood samples from Anna, Sophie, Caroline, and Emma. She analyzed their cortisol levels. She sequenced their DNA. She mapped their epigenetic markers. The results were published in 2017 in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. The paper was titled Epigenetic Signatures of Maternal Sexual Trauma in Adult Daughters. The findings? All 4 women had altered expression of the FKBP5 gene, the same gene altered in Holocaust survivors' children. All 4 women had dysregulated cortisol response, hypervigilant stress systems. All 4 women had elevated inflammatory markers, chronic low-level immune activation. And all 4 women shared a pattern of methylation on genes related to fear response, memory consolidation, and emotional regulation. The pattern was unmistakable. These women were not imagining their symptoms. They were not weak. They were not broken. They were carrying a biological inheritance, a testimony written in their cells. In 2018, Anna Hallen sat down with Dr. Rachel Yehuda for an interview. The interview was recorded and later published as part of a documentary series on intergenerational trauma. Anna asked, Dr. Yehuda, when you first studied Holocaust survivors' children, did you expect to find biological evidence of inherited trauma? Dr. Yehuda responded, No, honestly, I thought we would find psychological patterns, learned behaviors, family dynamics. I did not expect to find changes at the molecular level, but the data was undeniable. Anna continued, "How do you explain this to people who don't understand science? How do you explain that I can inherit my mother's trauma even though I never experienced it?" Dr. Yehuda said, "I tell them, your body is not just yours. It carries the history of everyone who came before you. When your mother experienced trauma, severe, unresolved trauma, her body changed, her stress response system adapted to survive, and those adaptations were encoded in ways that could be passed to you. You inherited not the memory of the trauma, but the biology of survival." Anna asked, "Is that reversible?" Dr. Yehuda responded, "Yes, in some cases. Therapy, medication, lifestyle changes, they all can influence gene expression. Epigenetics is not destiny, but it does mean that healing requires more than just talking. It requires addressing the body's memory." Anna said, "My mother never told me what happened. She was institutionalized when I was an infant. We were separated. I have no conscious memory of her trauma, and yet," Dr. Yehuda finished, "and yet you feel it." Anna nodded. "Yes, I've had nightmares since I was 16. I've never been assaulted, but my body reacts as if I have. I can't enter a medical building without panicking. How is that possible?"
Dr. Yehuda explained, "Because your mother's body was in a state of terror during her pregnancy, during her early months with you. That terror, cortisol, adrenaline, inflammatory markers, crossed the placenta. It affected your development, and even after you were separated, the changes remained. Your body learned fear before you had words for it." Anna said quietly, "That feels like a life sentence." Dr. Yehuda responded, "It's not. It's a life condition, one that requires awareness and treatment. But you are not doomed. You are informed." Anna continued, "The women who hurt my mother, the doctors, the police, the town, they thought silence would end it. They thought if they buried the story, it would go away. But it didn't." Dr. Yehuda agreed. No, it migrated into bodies, into cells, into the next generation. Silence does not erase trauma, it just moves it underground. But the records show something even more disturbing. Dr. Yehuda's research has profound implications beyond individual cases. If trauma can be inherited biologically, then entire populations may be carrying the unresolved trauma of their ancestors. In 2019, researchers at Emory University studied the descendants of enslaved people in the United States. They found elevated rates of hypertension, diabetes, and stress-related disorders, even when controlling for socioeconomic factors. The hypothesis, centuries of trauma, enslavement, violence, family separation had altered gene expression in ways that persisted across generations. In 2020, researchers in Canada studied Indigenous communities affected by the residential school system, a government program that forcibly removed Indigenous children from their families and placed them in abusive institutions. They found similar patterns. Descendants of residential school survivors had higher rates of PTSD, substance abuse, and suicide, even if they had never attended the schools themselves. The body remembers what history tries to forget. Not all scientists accept the theory of epigenetic inheritance. Some argue that the studies are too small. Some argue that correlation does not prove causation. Some argue that what appears to be biological inheritance is actually learned behavior, children absorbing their parents' fear, not inheriting it genetically. In 2018, a geneticist named Dr. Kevin Mitchell published a critique of Dr. Yehuda's work. He argued, "The evidence for epigenetic inheritance in humans is weak. Most of these studies show associations, not mechanisms. We do not yet understand how or if epigenetic markers are stably transmitted across generations." Dr. Yehuda responded, "I agree that we need more research, but the clinical evidence is overwhelming. These children are not learning fear from their parents. Many of them were separated from their parents at birth. Many of them knew nothing of their parents' trauma, and yet they carry the same biological markers. That is not learned behavior. That is inheritance." The debate continues, but for the daughters of Thomas Carver's victims, the debate is irrelevant because they know what their bodies feel, and they know it is real. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2019, a geneticist named Dr. Brian Diaz conducted an experiment with mice. He exposed male mice to the smell of cherry blossoms and then shocked them. The mice learned to fear the smell. Diaz then bred these mice. The offspring, who had never been shocked, who had never met their fathers, also feared the smell of cherry blossoms. Their brains showed increased sensitivity in the olfactory regions associated with that scent. The fear had been inherited. Diaz published his findings in Nature Neuroscience. The paper was titled "Parental Olfactory Experience Influences Behavior and Neurostructure in Subsequent Generations." The implications were staggering. If trauma could be inherited in mice, it could be inherited in humans. If fear could be encoded and passed down, so could every other extreme emotion: grief, rage, helplessness. Anna read the study. She called Dr. Yehuda. "Does this mean my children will inherit this too?" Dr. Yehuda paused. "Possibly, but it also means that healing can be inherited. If you address the trauma, if you process it, treat it, resolve it, you may be able to alter your own gene expression and pass that down instead." In 2020, Anna Hallen made a decision. She would undergo genetic counseling. She wanted to know, if she had children, would they carry her mother's trauma? She met with a genetic counselor at Mount Sinai Hospital. The counselor reviewed Anna's medical history. She reviewed the epigenetic study. She ordered additional tests. The results came back in March 2020. The counselor sat across from Anna and said, "Your epigenetic markers show evidence of inherited trauma, but they also show evidence of resilience. You have elevated cortisol dysregulation, yes, but you also have markers associated with adaptive coping, likely from years of therapy, support, and processing." Anna asked, "If I have children, will they inherit the trauma?" The counselor said, "They may inherit some markers, but epigenetics is not static. Your current state, your healing, will influence what you pass down. The more you heal, the less likely the trauma is to persist." Anna asked, "So healing isn't just for me?" The counselor smiled. "No, healing is for everyone who comes after you." Anna left the appointment and sat in her car for 20 minutes. She thought about her mother. She thought about the 14 women. She thought about the daughters who carried their silence. And she understood something profound. The body is not just a site of trauma. It is a site of testimony. And testimony, spoken, acknowledged, witnessed, can break the cycle. The story of Ruth Hallen and Thomas Carver is not unique. It is not exceptional. It is not rare. It is common. Across the world, in every culture, in every era, the same pattern repeats. A person with power commits a crime. The crime is witnessed. The witness is silenced. The system protects the powerful. And the victims and their descendants carry the consequence. This is not conspiracy. This is not theory. This is architecture, the architecture of power.
the architecture of complicity, the architecture of forgetting. And the daughters of the silenced, across continents, across decades, are discovering the same truth. The body does not forget, even when the world demands it. In Ireland, between 1922 and 1996, over 10,000 women and girls were imprisoned in institutions called Magdalene laundries. These were Catholic-run workhouses. The women sent there were labeled fallen, unmarried mothers, rape victims, girls deemed too pretty, too defiant, too sexual. They were forced to work without pay, washing clothes, scrubbing floors, sometimes for years, sometimes for life. They were beaten, starved, forbidden to speak. Many died there. Many were buried in unmarked graves. The laundries operated for 74 years. The Irish government knew, the Catholic Church knew, families knew. But no one stopped it, because the women were considered disposable. Their testimony was considered worthless. Their bodies were considered shameful. The last laundry closed in 1996. In 2013, the Irish government issued a formal apology. In 2014, a mass grave was discovered beneath the grounds of a former laundry in Tuam, County Galway. 796 bodies, children and infants, buried without ceremony, without record, without names. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2017, researchers at University College Dublin began studying the descendants of Magdalene survivors. They interviewed 120 women, daughters and granddaughters of women who had been imprisoned in the laundries. The findings mirrored Dr. Yehuda's Holocaust studies. The descendants reported chronic anxiety and depression, difficulty trusting authority figures, fear of institutions, hospitals, churches, schools, unexplained shame about their bodies, nightmares involving confinement. Many of them had never been told their mothers' or grandmothers' full stories, but their bodies knew. One woman, a 42-year-old teacher named Fiona O'Connor, said, "My grandmother never spoke about the laundry, but I grew up terrified of nuns. I would have panic attacks in church. I didn't know why. When I finally learned what happened to her, it all made sense. My body had been carrying her fear." In Australia, between 1910 and 1970, the government forcibly removed over 100,000 Indigenous children from their families. The children were placed in foster homes, orphanages, and religious institutions. They were forbidden to speak their languages. They were punished for practicing their cultures. They were told their parents had abandoned them. Many were abused, physically, sexually, emotionally. Many never saw their families again. This policy was called assimilation. The goal was to breed out Indigenous identity, to erase Indigenous culture, to make Indigenous people disappear. The policy ended in 1970. In 2008, the Australian government issued a formal apology, but the damage had already been done. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2016, researchers at the University of Melbourne studied the descendants of the stolen generations. They found that the grandchildren, people born decades after the removals ended, had significantly higher rates of suicide, substance abuse, chronic illness, developmental trauma, even when they had been raised in stable, loving homes, even when they had never experienced removal themselves. One researcher, Dr. Pat Dudgeon, explained, "Trauma is not just an event. It is a disruption of identity, connection, and safety. When you forcibly remove children from their families, you don't just harm those children, you harm their children and their children's children, because the loss of connection, the loss of belonging, becomes encoded in the body. A woman named Janelle, 38 years old, told researchers, "My grandmother was taken when she was 6. She never talked about it, but she had this sadness, this heaviness that never left, and I feel it too. I've felt it my whole life, like I'm mourning something I can't name." Between 1932 and 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army forced over 200,000 women, mostly from Korea, China, and the Philippines, into sexual slavery. They were called comfort women. They were held in military brothels. They were raped dozens of times a day. They were beaten, starved, infected with disease. Many died. Those who survived were told to remain silent. For decades they did, not because they had forgotten, but because speaking meant shame, speaking meant dishonor, speaking meant reliving what they had survived. In 1991, a woman named Kim Hak-sun became the first to speak publicly. She was 67 years old. She testified before the South Korean government. She said, "I am not ashamed. The ones who should be ashamed are the ones who did this to us." Her testimony opened the floodgates. Hundreds of women came forward in Japan, in Korea, in China, in the Philippines. They demanded acknowledgement. They demanded apology. They demanded justice. The Japanese government issued a partial apology in 1993, but many survivors said it was insufficient. Many died before receiving full acknowledgement. But the records show something even more disturbing. In 2015, researchers in South Korea began studying the children of comfort women. They found that the daughters, now in their 60s and 70s, had significantly higher rates of PTSD, chronic pain, autoimmune disorders, difficulty with intimacy. Many of them had been told nothing about their mother's pasts, but they carried the symptoms anyway. One woman, a 68-year-old woman named Lee Min-so, said, "My mother never told me what happened to her during the war, but she would wake up screaming. She couldn't be touched. She flinched at loud noises, and I grew up the same way. I thought I was just like her, but now I understand. I wasn't just like her. I was carrying her." The pattern is undeniable. In Ireland, in Australia, in Korea, in Rwanda, in the United States, in Canada, wherever trauma is silenced, it does not disappear. It migrates into bodies, into cells, into the next generation. Dr. Rachel Yehuda has called this phenomenon biological witness, the idea that when the law fails to acknowledge trauma, when society refuses to bear witness, the body steps in. The body becomes the archive. The body becomes the testimony. The body becomes the proof. In 2019, Dr. Yehuda published a paper titled Epigenetic Inheritance as Biological Justice. In it, she argued, when societies deny trauma, when they bury history, when they silence victims, the body refuses to comply. The body remembers, and it passes that memory forward, not as punishment, but as evidence, as a refusal to let the crime be forgotten. Anna Hallen read the paper. She called Dr. Yehuda. "Are you saying our bodies are witnesses?" Dr. Yehuda said, "I'm saying your bodies are testifying, even when your mouths were silenced, even when the law ignored you, your bodies carried the truth, and they passed it forward, so that one day someone would listen." But the records show something even more disturbing.
This is not just about individual families. This is about entire populations. Researchers are now studying the descendants of enslaved people in the Americas, Holocaust survivors in Europe, genocide survivors in Cambodia, partition survivors in India and Pakistan, war survivors in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the pattern holds. Trauma is not confined to those who experienced it. It ripples outward, through generations, through biology, through silence, until someone decides to speak. In 2018, 2 years after the Ruth Hallen house opened, Anna visited the center. She walked through the rooms where her mother had never been allowed to heal. She met the women who now lived there, survivors of assault, trafficking, abuse. Women from Vermont, from Massachusetts, from New York. Women who had been silenced, women who had been told they were lying, women who had been erased. One of them, a woman named Clara, 29 years old, approached Anna in the common room. "Are you Ruth's daughter?" Anna nodded. Clara said, "I read her letter, the one you published. It's hanging in the hallway." Anna blinked. "It is?" "Yes, we all read it when we arrive. It reminds us that we're not alone, that other women have survived this, that silence doesn't have to be forever." Clara paused. "Your mother saved my life, even though she's been dead for 30 years. Anna stood in the hallway. She looked at the framed letter, 14 pages, handwritten, behind glass. Beneath it, a plaque. Ruth Hallen, 1953 to 1991. Her voice was silenced, but her words remain. Anna touched the glass, and she thought, this is what justice looks like. Not in courtrooms, not in verdicts, but in rooms where women are finally allowed to speak, and in bodies that are finally allowed to heal. In December 2020, Anna received an anonymous letter, no return address, postmarked from Burlington. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. It read, "Dear Anna, you do not know me, but I know you. I was one of the women your mother named in her letter. I'm the 12th name on the list. I have spent 40 years trying to forget. I changed my name. I moved away. I told no one. But I have been watching. I saw the memorial. I read the articles. I saw your mother's letter published. And I want you to know, she was not lying. None of us were lying. I am 73 years old now. I have 2 daughters, 3 grandchildren. They do not know what happened to me. I have never told them, but I think I will, because you taught me something. You taught me that silence does not protect the people we love. It only passes the pain to them. Thank you for believing your mother. Thank you for refusing to be silent. You gave me permission to speak. I do not know if I will ever be ready, but at least now I know I could be. A woman who is no longer alone." Anna read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in a box with the others. The box now held over 50 letters,
from survivors, from daughters, from women who had been silenced and were finally finding their voices. Anna did not reply to the anonymous letters. She simply kept them, because she understood. Some voices do not need an answer. They just need to be heard.
I want to speak to you directly now, not as a narrator, but as a custodian of stories that should never have been forgotten. For the past 90 minutes, you have walked with me through the life and death of Ruth Hallen, through the crimes of Thomas Carmer, through the silence of a town, through the inheritance of trauma, through the biology of witness. But this story, Ruth's story, is not unique. It is one thread in a tapestry woven from 10,000 silences. There are names you will never hear. Women who were drugged, violated, and erased by men the world called respectable. Women who tried to speak and were institutionalized, discredited, destroyed. Women whose daughters now carry symptoms they cannot explain. Women whose stories died with them. But their bodies did not forget. And their descendants, whether they know it or not, are still carrying the testimony. This documentary exists for one reason: to remind you that silence is not neutral. Silence is not mercy. Silence is not protection. Silence is a choice, and every choice has a consequence. Let me tell you about others, not in detail, but enough that you understand. This pattern is everywhere. In the 1950s, in a small town in Georgia, a minister named Harold Finch assaulted over 20 women in his congregation. When one woman spoke, she was excommunicated. The others stayed silent. Reverend Finch died in 1987, honored and respected. His victims died forgotten. But their daughters, now in their 60s, still have nightmares about churches. In the 1970s, in a suburb of Chicago, a high school coach named Robert Newell abused at least 15 boys over a span of 12 years. When one boy told his parents, the school board transferred Newell to another district. The other boys stayed silent. Newell retired with a pension in 1995. His victims struggled with addiction, depression, suicide. And their children, raised by fathers who could not speak of what had been done to them, are now discovering the same struggles. In the 1980s, in a Catholic diocese in Pennsylvania, over 300 priests were credibly accused of abusing children. The church moved them from parish to parish. The victims were paid settlements on the condition they sign non-disclosure agreements. The silence was purchased. The abuse continued. And now, 40 years later, the descendants of those victims are seeking therapy for symptoms they do not understand, symptoms their bodies inherited. But the records show something even more disturbing. These are not isolated incidents. They are systemic. Between 1950 and 2000, over 17,000 women in the United States were forcibly sterilized without their knowledge or consent. Most of them were poor. Most of them were Black, Indigenous, or Latina. They went into hospitals for routine procedures, appendectomies, childbirth, and woke to find they had been sterilized. The practice was legal in many states until the 1970s. The victims received no apology, no compensation, no acknowledgement. Between 1932 and 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service conducted a study in Tuskegee, Alabama. They recruited 600 Black men, most of them sharecroppers, and told them they were being treated for bad blood. In reality,
The men had syphilis, and the doctors were not treating them. They were studying the progression of untreated syphilis. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, the doctors withheld treatment. The men died slowly, painfully. Their families were never told the truth. The study continued for 40 years. These are not conspiracy theories. These are documented facts. Crimes committed by people in positions of trust. Crimes protected by systems designed to bury truth. Crimes that were never punished, but crimes that left biological scars. Scars that can now be measured, studied, and traced across generations. Now I ask you, what stories remain unheard in your own family? I do not ask this lightly. I am not accusing you. I am asking you to consider. What silence have you inherited? What anxiety, what fear, what inexplicable shame? What symptoms have you carried that you cannot explain? What stories were your parents, your grandparents forbidden to tell? Perhaps you grew up with a mother who could not be touched. Perhaps you grew up with a father who could not speak of the war. Perhaps you grew up with a grandmother who flinched at sudden movements. Perhaps you grew up with nightmares that made no sense. Perhaps you grew up feeling a grief you could not name. Perhaps you have always wondered, why do I feel this way? And perhaps, just perhaps, the answer is not in your own life, but in the life of someone who came before you. Someone who survived something they were never allowed to speak. Someone whose body carried what their voice could not, and passed it to you. This is not meant to burden you. This is meant to inform you. Because if you know the source, you can begin to heal it. If you can name the inheritance, you can refuse to pass it forward. But the records show something even more disturbing. Healing is not just personal, it is generational. When you address your trauma, when you speak it, process it, witness it, you do not just heal yourself, you heal everyone who comes after you, because epigenetics works both ways. Trauma can be inherited, but so can resilience. Dr. Rachel Yehuda's research shows that the children of Holocaust survivors who sought therapy, who built strong support systems, who processed their trauma, those children had lower rates of PTSD than expected. The parents' healing altered their biology, and that altered biology was passed to their children. In other words, your healing is not selfish. It is sacred. It is an act of protection for those who have not yet been born. This channel, Stories Left Unheard, is not entertainment. It is an archive. We do not tell stories to shock you. We do not tell stories to entertain you. We tell stories to exhume them, to pull them from the ground where they were buried, to hold them up to the light and say, this happened. These people existed, their pain was real, and we will not let them be forgotten. Every story we tell is an act of witness, and witness, true witness, is a form of justice. Not legal justice, not punitive justice, but moral justice. The justice of acknowledgement, the justice of being seen, the justice of having your testimony believed. Ruth Hallen never received justice in a courtroom, but she received justice when her daughter read her letter aloud, when her name was spoken at a memorial, when her story was published in newspapers, when her house became a place of healing. That is what witness does. It does not undo the harm, but it refuses to let the harm remain invisible. And invisibility, more than anything else, is what trauma demands. Trauma wants to be hidden. It wants to be denied. It wants to be forgotten. But witness refuses. Witness says, I see you. Witness says, I believe you. Witness says, your pain mattered. Your life mattered. You mattered. And that, more than any verdict, more than any sentence, is what the silenced need. To be heard. Ruth Hallen died in her sleep. She was never charged, she was never tried, she was never imprisoned. But she did not escape consequence. Her mind fractured, her body betrayed her, her reputation was dismantled, her name was removed, and her son who chose silence, died of a broken heart. Some will say this is not enough. Some will say justice requires punishment, and perhaps they are right. But I ask you to consider a different kind of justice, the justice of inevitability. The world is not random. It is not chaotic. It is not unjust. It is patient.
Thomas Carver believed he could silence 14 women and walk away. He was wrong. The silence did not hold. It cracked, it fractured, it collapsed, and the truth, slow, relentless, inevitable, found its way to the surface. Not through the law, through the daughters, through the body, through the refusal to forget. That is the moral law. Not the law written in courtrooms, but the law written in cells, in genes, in the architecture of consequence. No secret remains buried. No crime dies with its author. Power only delays judgment. The body remembers what the law forgets. And eventually, always eventually, someone speaks. If you have watched this documentary, you are now a witness. You have heard Ruth Hallen's name. You have heard the names of the 13 other women. You have heard their daughters' testimonies. You have heard the science. You have heard the pattern. And now you carry a responsibility, not a legal one, but a moral one. If you know someone who has been silenced, believe them. If you carry inherited pain, speak it. If you have the power to acknowledge harm, use it. If you see silence being weaponized, break it. Because silence is not just the absence of sound, it is the presence of complicity, and the only antidote to silence is witness. If this story has moved you, do not let it end here. Share it, speak it, write it down. Tell someone, this happened, these women existed, they deserved to be remembered. Because that, more than any law, more than any verdict, is what breaks the cycle. Not punishment, witness. In 2021, Anna Hallen stood on the porch of the Ruth Hallen house. It was autumn. The leaves were gold. The air was cold. A young woman, a survivor who had been at the house for 3 months, walked out and stood beside her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think your mother knows about all of this? About the memorial, the house, the apology?" Anna paused. "I don't know. I hope so." The young woman nodded. "I think she does. I think she's been watching, and I think she's proud." Anna looked at the house. The windows glowed with light. Inside, women were cooking dinner, laughing, talking. Women who had been silent for years. Women who were finally learning to speak. Anna thought about her mother, about the letter she wrote in 1985, about the 14 pages of testimony that sat sealed for 22 years, about the body that carried what the voice could not. And she understood something profound. Her mother had been speaking all along, not with words, but with biology, not with testimony, but with inheritance, not with voice, but with body. And now, finally, someone had listened. This is the archive of the silent, a record of voices that were stolen, of stories that were buried, of lives that were erased. But also a record of daughters who refused to forget, of bodies that refused to lie, of truth that refused to stay buried.
We do not tell these stories to entertain you. We tell them to witness them, to say you existed, your pain was real, and we will not let the world forget. If you know a story that remains unheard, tell us. If you carry a silence that weighs too much, speak it. If you are a daughter of the silenced, know this: you are not alone. Your body is not broken. It is testifying. And testimony, spoken, acknowledged, and witnessed, is the only justice that cannot be taken away. Ruth Hallen, Marie Dunn, Ellen Mayhew, Patricia Cross, Jane, and the 8 others whose names were finally spoken. You were silenced, but you are remembered. This is Stories Left Unheard. You are now a witness.
Some stories disappear because no one listens. Others survive because someone refuses to forget. Ruth Hallen was silenced. So were 14 other women. But their truth endured, in letters, in memory, in the bodies of their daughters. This is not just their story. It is a reminder of what happens when silence is allowed to win. So, I ask you, how many stories like this are still waiting to be heard? How many voices are still buried beneath fear, power, and forgetting? If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you that truth matters, then stay with us. Subscribe, because the silent are still waiting, and every witness matters. You are one now.